mic now works, but I'm not hearing anybody. So
J'ouvre maintenant la...
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 55 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, the committee resumed its study of intercity transport by bus in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application.
Colleagues, I wish to inform you all that the witnesses have been tested for today's meeting and have passed the sound test, with the exception, unfortunately, of Miss Adele Perry, and we're hoping to get that worked out before we turn it over to her for her opening remarks. We have appearing before us as individuals Dr. Sarah Patricia Breen, Regional Innovation Chair, Rural Economic Development, Selkirk College by video conference. Welcome. We have Ms. Adele Perry, Distinguished Professor of History and Women's and Gender Studies by video conference. Welcome to you as well. We have from the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium, Dr. Josipa Petrunic, I hope I pronounced that correctly, President and Chief Executive Officer, joining by video conference. Welcome to you as well. We will begin today by turning it over to Dr. Breen for opening remarks. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you and good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I'm honored to join you from the traditional territories of the Snakes, Syilx, Ktunaxa, and Secwepemc peoples. And I'm hoping to summarize some of the key rural considerations for the committee. When we talk about rural transit, we often focus on prominent examples like the loss of Greyhound Canada, but it's important to note that that type of example isn't necessarily representative of the range of services that exist. Transportation between communities includes both long and short trips, as well as occasional and regular. And I want to pay particular attention to the need for inter-community transit that serves these shorter, regular trips. As we know, it's a mistake to assume that people living in rural areas have access to personal vehicles. And it's equally a mistake to assume that these regular, shorter trips happen in the same community. It's much more common for today's people to have their regularly used services, places of employment, and home all be in different communities. And this highlights a need, particularly in those communities where there's a shortage of affordable housing, but where there's a workforce shortage. And the people needed to fill those workforce shortages end up living in outlying areas or neighboring communities. And the lack of inter-community transit can really impact the ability for people to go to school, to see a doctor, or to hold a job. And this disproportionately impacts certain parts of our society, including youth, seniors, Indigenous peoples, and newcomers. I want to offer a few highlights about what my research tells us about rural transit in Canada today. And that is that we often treat rural as if it's a single homogeneous group, where rural solutions or strategies are discussed very generally and not recognizing differences across different types of rural places. We found several barriers to sustainable rural transit between communities, and that included general challenges like the costs of operation, but also very place-specific challenges like local travel patterns or economic structure. When we looked at related funding and support programs, we identified two substantial barriers, including the lack of rural-specific funding and the lack of funding for operational costs. An important note is that the current state of knowledge around transit in rural places is very geographically uneven. What we know is dominated by the experiences of larger urban adjacent communities, particularly those in Southern Ontario, Southern Quebec, and British Columbia. Through our work, we identified over 100 examples of rural transit systems, most of which were actually inter-community services. This highlights both a need as well as the growing number of available solutions, not just fixed route bus systems, but more innovative approaches like on-demand services. And I want to spend my remaining time on three key considerations for the committee. The first is that there's a need for us to address knowledge gaps, particularly when it comes to underrepresented communities and regions. These knowledge gaps limit our ability to make evidence-based decisions, and the federal government should continue to support efforts to address these gaps, not only through academic research, but through funding communities and regions to assess their needs and evaluate potential solutions. And in the interim, we should be conscious of gaps and biases in the information that we have. The second consideration is that differences across place, particularly in rural, means that there's no single solution. There's a key need to include rural considerations in development of policy and programs and solutions so that we avoid unintentionally leaving out or otherwise negatively impacting rural places. The recent Federal Rural Transit Solutions Fund is a great example of a rural-specific program. Solutions for inter-community transportation need to be flexible, but while those solutions could look different across the country, there is a need for that connection and collaboration between them, and the federal government has an important role to play in ensuring that continuity across Canada. And lastly, I'll leave you with, we really need to acknowledge and account for the differences between where the benefits of transit accrue versus where the costs are borne. We know that transit services have a range of social, environmental, and economic benefits, but a fundamental challenge is that where those benefits accrue are dispersed among individuals, businesses, community, and society, whereas the costs are all borne by the service provider. And this is exacerbated in rural areas because of long distances and small populations. The federal government, I think, has an important role to play in addressing this challenge, not only through, say, publicly funding a transit system, but in terms of what is eligible to be funding. So the Federal Rural Transit Solutions Fund I mentioned could be greatly improved if it allowed for operational funding. And I think I'm probably pushing 5 minutes, so I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Breen. Next, we have Dr. Petronich. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much to the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So to start with, I'd like to also recognize the missing and murdered Indigenous women that QTRIC recognizes as part of its innovation strategy nationally. And that is especially important here as we talk about access. I'm going to come back to that in the Highway of Tears and the pilot experimentation that's occurring in British Columbia. So the general message of what I'm going to share here today is that public transit and interregional transit can't solve all problems, but it can solve a lot of them. And it's been under-leveraged historically in Canada. So far, in the context of today's discussion, the federal government has made great moves with the Zero Emissions Transit Fund and the Rural Transit Funds. These are great starts and critical, but it is the promise of permanent transit funding in the future that we're looking towards. Beyond that, however, to ensure that those dollars are best spent and future-proof, there are at least 4 areas we need to consider: pandemic recovery, recent safety issues in transit and mobility, interregional coaching and bus connections with the rail network, and decarbonization of the entire system. So I'm going to spend my next 4 minutes talking about those 4 points. The first is pandemic recovery. Just to set the scene, I'm sure a lot of folks are wondering, well, what is the state of ridership across the country? As we all know, during the pandemic, ridership dropped off about 80, 90, 100%. In some communities, it was catastrophic. But the good news is ridership is right back up. It's trending upwards. So we have some cities like Brampton, Charlottetown, Cornwall, where it's pre-pandemic levels of ridership, which is both good and bad, because the good means ridership is coming back. The bad means it's crushed capacity in those urban centers. It means the bus is passing you by because there's no room for you on the bus. And that just points to the fact that transit was underfunded to start with across the country prior to the pandemic, and we're coming back to that scenario. Other locations like TransLink back up to 80% in Vancouver, Calgary Transit and a few others down still around 60%. But this is in line with global experiences. We have cities like Vienna back at 100%, cities like Sydney at 60%. So that trend line is upward. That doesn't take away from the fact that nurses, teachers, public sector employees, and especially frontline workers on minimum wage have no other option. It's their critical economic pipeline to get to their income generating opportunity. So the first point to raise here is, as part of pandemic recovery, ridership is coming back. It will go through the roof, especially as we start opening the doors, as we necessarily must, to hundreds of thousands of immigrants. They will necessarily need means of getting around. And that system of getting around across our cities in Canada has been historically underfunded and insufficient. Now, layer on top of it the fact that heading into the pandemic, almost no transit system in this country, urban, interregional, or rural, was prepared to deal with the issues of viral load, ventilation, materials on board that could reduce safety, unsafe conditions. So the first recommendation we'd put forward to this committee to consider is the fact that transit needs to be a place of innovation. And although we have funding programs now for capital, there has to be absolutely a transit innovation supercluster style strategic innovation fund focus. And we've typically thought about transit and mobility as the place that Infrastructure Canada goes to and ministries of transportation for capital. But in reality, we need to really leverage the tools of ISED, the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, for a post-pandemic return to safe transit, because zoonotic illnesses are clearly here to stay. Whether it's a pandemic or an epidemic, transit cannot be brought back to a grinding halt. And we know at QTRIC that there are dozens of potential studies across the country that could help to make for safer systems, both at the station and on board the bus in terms of preparedness for the future. The second issue that I'd like to raise is what has come up and is on top of mind for a lot of people, recent safety issues beyond viral load and pandemic anxiety, the issue of physical safety of people on public transit, whether again, that's urban, interregional, or rural. The spate of violence that we've all heard about in the news does take over our thoughts about returning to transit, and it exacerbates the reluctance to return to ride public mobility systems. We know very well in the research world that almost nothing in life is random. So although we want to say these are random attacks occurring, almost nothing in life is random. And if you've done a course in statistics, you know that. And so in the words of the head of the TTC, Rick Leary, we really do need better data analytics to start to identify why and where a lot of physical attacks are occurring. It is true that transit itself cannot solve the social ills of society on its own. Housing is an issue, mental health is an issue, but there's also true that transit is a space where innovation can be implemented tomorrow to create greater levels of safety for Canadian riders, to encourage people to return to transit in the way that we need in the interest of climate action and congestion and all the other reasons why public mobility helps people live a better life. So some of those innovations that already exist in our universities and pilots around the world that we can start to implement in Canada include everything from the basics, safety buttons and loud piercing noise machines, signage around advertising for mental health supports throughout stations, artificial intelligence that is not that complicated, that can track in real time the geographic and demographic patterns of unease, attack, or feelings of unease on the system, and big data analytics that can demonstrate seeming patterns in seemingly randomized attacks, CCTV, musical interventions at stations, the classical music effect to disperse crowding, and of course, on-track glass paneling for subways. These are all things that exist in transit systems and mobility systems around the world. We have cities like City of Mexico trying to figure out how to help women be safe because they know when you get on transit, there's a good chance of being raped. I mean, we are not operating on our own as Canadian mobility. It's not like we're starting from scratch. So the second recommendation we'd make to this committee, again, back to the first one, is investing in something like a supercluster focused on, or a strategic innovation fund stream focused on innovation in transit and mobility across Canada, both for post-pandemic recovery and for safety innovation, technological and
unfortunately,
social,
Dr.
Yes.
Petronik, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up. If you could just conclude in 15 seconds, please.
Absolutely.
Thank
so
you.
Those are the first two. And the third recommendation around interregional coaching and bus systems is a focus on investing in a national strategy that will see via rail coach systems in provinces and public transit systems that back onto that skeleton actually optimized and integrated with each other, which doesn't exist today for point-to-point mobility. Those are the three recommendations we put forward to the committee to consider today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petronich. Next, we have Ms. Perry. Ms. Perry, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
For this opportunity to speak to you today. I've had some issues with being heard, I guess, with the tech, but it sounds like you can hear me, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Innu, and the Métis people governed by the promises of Treaty 1. It's fair to say that this territory, where I've lived as a settler for a little over than 2 decades, is currently in a crisis of accessible, meaningful, and appropriate long-distance or intercity public transit. In many respects, it has not always been this way. Manitoba did not develop the provincial system of bus transit that our provincial neighbors to the west did. But nonetheless, Manitoba developed a network of overlapping bus and rail transportation that connected people to different communities and to leisure options. The shift toward automobility that occurred throughout the continent made its mark here too, and many of the smaller bus lines and passenger train routes closed in the 1970s, 80s, and in the 90s. But the near collapse of intercity bus transit that has occurred in Manitoba in the 2010s is particular. Of course, Greyhound withdrew from its Western Canadian routes in 2018. In the same year, though, Jefferson Lines canceled its bus running between Winnipeg and North Dakota. A year later, the third company to try running a Winnipeg-Selkirk bus route ceased operation. 5 years later, it is clear that the mixture of markets, subsidies, and programs that are currently available is not sufficient to maintain reliable fixed service bus routes within the province. There is a shifting patchwork of operators covering some routes at some times. Only 2 offer daily service, a van shuttle running between Brandon and Winnipeg's airport, and NCN bus lines owned by Nishnawayek Cree Nation covering the Winnipeg-Thompson route. You can take Maple bus line from Winnipeg to Thompson 5 days a week, Mahacan from Winnipeg to Flin Flon 5 days a week, and Ontario Northland eastward 6 days a week. There is only one bus currently traveling from Winnipeg to Regina, leaving weekly at 11 p.m. on Saturdays. A few weeks ago, you could book a trip to Vancouver, though it would take 3 transfers, cost $419, and take about 37 hours. When I checked last night, that route was no longer available. The highly limited and confusing possibilities of intercity bus travel in Manitoba affect some communities and people more than others. As previous speakers here have spoken, we have too little data on who exactly depends on the bus in the age of automobility and air travel. We know that women have a greater reliance on public transit in urban centers. That the reduction in intercity transit options has particular implications for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people was a point that was made very powerfully in the wake of Greyhound's shuttering. The Native Women's Association of Canada explained, and I quote here, that it was deeply concerned for the safety of Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. Policy analyst Emily Riddell argued that Indigenous women, and I quote again, deserve to travel our homelands free from violence, and while transportation is only a small component of the changes needed for that to happen, it is an important one. Reclaiming Power in Place, the final report of the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, completed in 2019, offered an important analysis of public intercity and urban transit, one that has deserved more attention than I think it has received. Chapter 7 explains how, and I quote, a lack of safe and affordable transportation can mean that people may be forced to rely on other methods, such as walking or hitchhiking, not only to escape dangerous situations, but simply to travel for education or employment. In this way, and I quote again, inadequate infrastructure and transportation, or transportation that itself becomes a site for violence, effectively punishes Indigenous women trying to make a better life. 2 of the National Inquiry's final reports calls to justice directly concern transportation, and in particular, 4.8 calls upon all governments to ensure that adequate plans and funding have been put in place for safe and affordable transportation and transportation services and infrastructure for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA people living in remote and rural communities. Transportation should be sufficient and readily available to Indigenous communities and in towns and in cities located in all of the provinces and territories in Canada. Effective transit policy of the kind that this committee is considering must consider at its core the needs and lived experiences of its users, who are not undifferentiated black boxes of human beings, but people whose lives are shaped by gender, by indigeneity, by race, by socioeconomic class. At a moment where Canada is again being forced to reckon with the ongoing crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people, I urge the committee to consider the impact that the real crisis in intercity bus transit in the prairie provinces, and more particularly Manitoba, may have played in this, and how better transit policy that puts its users at its center might make meaningful change. Thank you.
Professor Perry. So we have a situation, unfortunately, Professor Perry, where we will unfortunately not be able to hear your testimony today with regards to questions and answers. The sound quality is inadequate to ensure the safety of our interpreters. So what I'll ask members to do is to submit questions, if it's okay to you, Professor Perry, to the clerk, which will be passed along to you by email. And we would very much welcome your responses by email as well. And we apologize for the inconvenience. We would have very much liked to have heard from you today and answer our questions. So that will leave Dr. Breen and Dr. Petronich for the testimony, and we are hoping to also get Mr. Joel McKay from Northern Development Initiative Trust, who is trying to log on as well, but having difficulties. I guess it's going around. And we will begin the line of questioning today with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses, including Ms. Perry, who obviously we won't have for the question period, but thank you for your testimony at the outset. So the focus of this study, of course, is on intercity buses, and I'm thinking back to my university days, which was only a couple of years ago. And there was a great bus line that operated from Hamilton to Kitchener-Waterloo that I took, and it actually still it would follow Highway 8 along all the rural communities in my constituency, from Greensville to Peters Corners, where I usually caught it. And if I missed that, I'd get it in Rockton or Sheffield. Went on into Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo, and it was very popular. And it ran a few times a day because it was often full. It was profitable, and it connected all of those communities. And Dr. Breen, you talked about this in your testimony. And so I'm wondering, given your expertise, is it possible to quantify, or even if it's a range, the number of these types of intercity routes that might exist in Canada?
So I'll try and answer that as best I can. It's hard. It's a hard thing to quantify because of what Professor Perry mentioned, in that there's a lot of instability in the existing transit systems, particularly those smaller ones. They pop up, they disappear, particularly in rural areas. They lack profitability, and so we see the startup and the disappearance and that type of thing. As I mentioned, we looked for, found, and mapped over 100 examples of rural transit systems, including those intercommunity transit systems. And what we found shows these really distinct patterns. So in Southern Ontario, in your riding, we do see a larger number of these systems, and that's in large part because of that, what I would call urban adjacent, more commuter type economy. And through the collaboration, if you will, of many communities, you get the economies of scale that you might not have in other rural places. So we tend to see more longer term successful systems. In BC, there's a large number of rural regional systems owing in large part to BC Transit. We don't see that prominence in other parts of the country. In the prairies, we largely see a vacuum. There isn't anything, in part because of the absence of the Saskatchewan Transit Company when it shuttered, or we see clusters like those in the Atlantic provinces that are volunteer driven. They obviously took a huge hit during COVID with volunteers fearing for safety and that type of thing. So I apologize for not being able to provide a specific figure, but what I will say is there's a large number of them. They ebb and flow, but the stability we see is in Southern Ontario and British Columbia because, one, due to population, and two, due to this stable BC transit system that we have in British Columbia.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate that. Because I think obviously this is a model we would want to replicate, and we did hear in November from a Saskatchewan bus company, privately operated, that similarly was a success story. And so obviously we want to encourage private operators that can offer this service. And they were expanding throughout the province of Saskatchewan, but they talked about the myriad of costs that they had to deal with in terms of licensing, insurance, obviously fuel, capital. And so, some of those things, of course, are provincial in nature. Are there any federal barriers that we can cut in terms of whether it be red tape or regulation or taxes that can help encourage the development of these sorts of bus lines?
Certainly. So as I mentioned in my presentation, it was great to see the federal funding that was rural specific and offering opportunities for rural transit systems, and that's much appreciated. Where there's opportunity for improvement there, and one example of that challenge or the potential red tape that can be taken away is the funding for operations. I'm kind of in the middle of penning an article called "Who's Driving This Bus?" because, well, we can get finances to purchase a bus or a van or that type of thing. There's very little money, no funding available to actually help with operators, and the distances and number of people for ridership make that the riders paying, either they're paying so much that it becomes unusable, or it's just not financially viable from a traditional perspective. So that's one piece.
If I could just interrupt there for a second, sorry, just because I've got a couple minutes left, because I wanted to actually ask on that point in terms of operational costs, obviously versus capital costs, and I mean, certainly my view is there are successful models. Should this not be a user pay system? And so why should the federal government be responsible to help with operational costs? And maybe just in the time that's remaining, if you could, because you did in your testimony talk about on demand. So how would that compare to on demand? I mean, I could take an Uber instead of a bus. Obviously, that's more pricey. So where's the sweet spot there?
The sweet spot would be place dependent. It's 100% depending on the locale, and so we see in those examples that are successful, they cater very specifically to the local travel patterns and the regional travel patterns. So there is no single answer to that. And in terms of the user pay private model, the basic answer to that is that in rural places, the distances and dispersed population mean that a traditional return on investment model are very unlikely to be profitable. And if they are profitable, they're going to be profitable because they are catering to people who can afford to pay it, which completely excludes those people that are, low income or face other disabilities or barriers to access. And so there's a real, and as I mentioned, there's a need to consider the very real benefits that those transit systems bring, but aren't easily calculated into return on investment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Breen, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, we have, prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Iacono. Monsieur Iacono, la parole.
Mr. Iacono, you have 6 minutes and you have the floor. Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being with us today. My first question is for Dr. Breen. Interurban bus service has been declining for several years now. What could replace this method of transport, and what are the implications of that type of change?
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of what could replace it, innovations that we're seeing in transit include the on-demand systems, which isn't, like an Uber, it's more of like a bus or a van system that people book the night before in advance, but instead of operating like an expensive shuttle, it operates like a regular bus, so it's considerably cheaper. We also see really innovative examples, some from Quebec, that include combinations of municipal fleets with local car shares. There's great examples of small communities in Quebec that have fleets of cars for the local municipality, but also use those as a line of revenue for the communities and offering them as car shares for individuals. We have regional car shares and ride share operations popping up all over the place. So there's just this really wide range of potential options that exist out there. And in terms of the implications, could I ask if you could clarify for me what you mean by implications?
Well, what changes would that lead to? You talked about different methods of transportation. What would be the consequences of using those methods? I think, well, just to give you an example, for cities that have transport fleets, for example, like what are the implications of that?
I see. So I most often work in places where there's no existing transit systems, so there's no fallout, I would say, for an existing operator, and that's not something I have a lot of experience with. The types of implications that I see are mostly on the benefits side, increased access for people, decreased greenhouse gas reductions. It's a very positive news story, increased access to services and education and that type of thing. I can see where you're coming from in terms of potential implications for existing operators, but it's not something that I run into very often in my line of work.
Merci.
Thank you. For Dr. Petrunic, we've seen new trends in interurban bus transportation in Canada. Do we see that in the U.S. as well? And what details can you give us about that?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it. So certainly in terms of some of the trends we're seeing in the United States that are starting to crop up in Canada as well, for coaching systems, it is identifying the fact that the middle class will happily take a coach bus if it is a luxury service and it serves their needs. And so the rise of some luxury services, Red Arrow is a great example, from Calgary to Edmonton, now expanding. And it goes from just having wider seats, cookies on board, Wi-Fi that functions. It's a moving office. That is a niche area, but it has taken off in Europe, and it started during the pre-pandemic period to become more popular in the United States. It is targeting that middle class that can afford a bit better than a typical old style Greyhound ride, but doesn't want to pay for a rail ride or a flight. That is a trend. The second trend that we are seeing is certainly on-demand shuttle service, and this speaks to your previous question. Current public operators, whether you're BC Transit, St. Catharines Transit, now Niagara Transit, Toronto Transit, these existing public urban transit providers are also integrating on-demand shuttle services. And there's absolutely no reason why, through provincial and federal alignment with the municipalities, these services cannot extend beyond the jurisdiction where they typically operate. It is entirely reasonable that there could be a TTC or GTHA level on-demand shuttle service that is centrally controlled by public transit in the interest of transit. It's not a 40-foot bus, not a 60-foot bus, not a big coach. It is an on-demand shuttle. Everywhere where on-demand shuttles are deployed by centralized public transit, they reduce emissions, increase ridership, reduce ridership time, and save operational dollars, including in Quebec, where EXO has one of the best operational pilots. Those are two of the models. So the on-demand shuttle model, but the solution there, it has to be centrally managed. Otherwise, it does become a clustered, congested, inefficient Uber-style system. It has to be centrally managed by the transit or public authority. And the second is the luxury coach service. But if I may add a third point to your previous question, what are some of the possibilities of increasing interregional transit and rural mobility? An immediate one is leveraging Via Rail. We do not leverage Via Rail's data and clientele. Via will stop at a station. There is no data going to the local, regional, and rural transit provider saying when these customers are getting off board. That it's a simple data solution. This is like 20 years ago the technology existed. So being able to leverage the existing clientele that feeds into Via already would support the growth of rural transit, including by private operators, as it should be, into some of the communities that are poorly served today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petrunic. Next, prochainement, nous avons almost...
Now we have Mr. Barcelot Duval. You have the floor, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank all of the witnesses who agreed to appear today. I think that it is an interesting study that's a bit different from some of the types of studies that we do in this committee. So I'd like to start with a question to Ms. Perry. So I looked at your background a little bit. You looked at the issue of obstacles. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Barcelot Duval. We're actually not going to be asking questions directly to Ms. Perry. So if you have a question for her, you can send her an email with all of your questions. It's a question of the sound quality for the interpreters. She is still with us online, but unfortunately we can't ask her any questions. I apologize for that. Oh, I'm sorry. I had misunderstood. Sorry about that. In that case, I'll ask a question to Ms. Petrunic. You were talking earlier about Via Rail. maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that and exactly what Via Rail could be doing to... Well, I mean, I'll tackle this from a different angle. You said there's a potential for, bus operators to benefit from information from Via Rail to improve their service to citizens. But if we look at it the other way, is it not also an opportunity for Via Rail to be able to benefit from additional ridership if they share more information about arrivals and departures with local transit operators?
Thank you, sir, for the question. 100% correct. This is a long-standing, bane of my existence issue. We have a national rail provider, and we can debate until tomorrow and next year and the next century about whether it's properly subsidized or not. The reality is it exists today, it moves people, and it has a clientele. And that clientele can be leveraged both ways. This issue is not only for VIA, it is also for Metrolinx and the GO regional network in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton areas. And it's increasingly an issue for anywhere where regional rail is starting to deploy. The issue is twofold. One, the clientele, the passengers on Via Rail or on Metrolinx get off at stations. Those stations are not served by Via or by Metrolinx per se. They are served by local transit agencies, or in the case of rural communities, sometimes private rural service providers, sometimes nobody, an Uber. The world would be flipped on its head to the benefit of Canadians with the simple data share of clientele arriving, when they arrive, and where they need to get to for those local transit systems as well as rural providers. And the reverse holds as well, enabling those private and public providers to share their data backward to be able to identify to the rail provider, or in the case of coach, if we take it even further, coach bus stations that do exist with FlixBus, with Red Arrow, when those people are arriving to their nearest local public transit stop, they are necessary clientele that can be leveraged for the rail network or the coach network going in the other direction. If I may give you one example, a longstanding issue has been across the Metrolinx line, holds for Via as well. You will have a number of public transit agencies that are on the backbone of Metrolinx through the Greater Toronto and Hamilton areas. What you do have is a one-way flow of information, typically from transit into Metrolinx. You don't have the other way. And so a lot of our members of the public transit agencies on that backbone, they don't have real-time data telling them when the train arrives, when should their bus be there. It is very simple. It's an operational choice, and it has been a lack of, shall I say, political will at the regional, provincial, and federal levels to recognize that this is causing damage to our mobility of Canadians. It is a data solution, an operational integration solution. And what's hindered it, of course, is municipal transit is municipal. Rural transit is often private provider. Rail is regional or federal. And all of these bodies are not talking together in a data sharing arrangement for ridership optimization. Your point is correct. These are clients going both ways, and we are not leveraging them properly.
Just to follow in the same vein, we heard testimony from bus operators, for example, who said that they'd previously tried to, establish those connections with Via Rail to line things up, but that it was really difficult for them because there was a lack of reliability. And there also seemed to be some issues in terms of infrastructure. So have you looked into that in detail? Like, do you know, for example, if we were to invest in better infrastructure at the Via Rail stations, to promote other operators coming there? Is that the type of investment that would be effective?
Yes, to the member, there's two elements that can be acted on. One is long term. That has to be a huge ideological choice by the government of the day. And one is short term that can be implemented relatively quickly with political will. The long term, as we all know, reliability comes down to track ownership. And so the long term is building the track for passenger mobility and passenger rail, not being stuck behind CP and CN freight trains. That's killing our rail service. We all know that. That is a large government of Canada, Canadian social discussion. Are we going to build that track for Canadians or not? That would increase reliability overnight, but it's a long-term investment. The shorter term investment is the data sharing with the providers. So the providers you heard from, what they are lacking is not just knowledge of when the train will arrive, knowledge of how late the train will be. So there's the fixed schedule, and then there's the real-time schedule, and simply that data sharing through applications and software to be able to inform the providers who are arriving to the stations to pick up. So those providers can inform their clientele. That is software innovation, that's technological innovation, and that would require very likely a mandate to VIA to share those data in real time. So without proper track upgrade, we're not going to solve fully the reliability issue. But if reliability is informed and if delays are properly informed to clients, then those private and public transit agencies that feed into that backbone can properly inform their own clientele about when the train will come and not come and arrange their operations to fit. This is not an impossible problem to solve. Public transit deals with delays all the time. And we know from research after research, the more you inform passengers and clients, the less likely they are to get turned off of the system the next time. So that is a solution that can be enacted almost immediately, but it's a choice by government through Via Rail to mandate that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petronich. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barthes-Duval. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all three of our panelists. I'm really sorry that we can't hear from Ms. Perry, but hopefully we'll be able to receive a brief and some answers to our questions. I'll start with Dr. Breen. Your testimony was very interesting, and you've written before about this dynamic between smaller volunteer-run systems or nonprofit systems and their innovation and flexibility. And the flip side of the coin, which is the stability and dependability of larger government-run systems. We're also talking about this other dynamic, which is the difference between intercommunity transit or intercommunity transportation and intercity transit between, larger centers across Canada, which is something that Greyhound provided. You could book a ticket from Prince George, BC, all the way to Toronto on a single carrier with an integrated system. Do we need to think about these systems separately? Do we need to think about intercommunity needs differently than intercity needs? And how does that play out in terms of the kind of solutions that we apply to those challenges?
That's a really interesting question. I would say, similarly to the previous speakers' responses to the last questions, there are, that data piece is really important. In terms of sharing information between these systems. As I said in my opening remarks, there isn't a single silver bullet system. We could bring back Greyhound tomorrow and we'd still be having conversations about issues with transit. Similarly, Via Rail is fantastic, but it comes absolutely nowhere near the Kootenays where I live, so I kind of forget it exists. And so it's that combination of transit systems that are regional in nature and intercommunity, and then those long haul systems. So they're not two separate conversations. They're kind of two parallel conversations that it's very important for them to talk to each other.
I'm wondering, picking up on that, the key challenge that we face right now, and the reason that the committee has come forward with this study is because people's transportation needs are not being met all across Canada. And I'm wondering if the main challenge is a lack of overall vision and direction nationally and funding to go with that, or whether the challenge is that we have lots of solutions, but they're fragmented, they're not talking to each other, we're not sharing data, we're not making them work together. Is the challenge that we're just not funding enough in this bucket, or is it the problem that the things that are already in the bucket don't work together?
It would be very cheeky of me to say both, but that is in fact the answer to that. I mean, we need an overarching vision and connection for this solution, and the federal government is well poised to play that role and to provide some additional funding and connection there. But that needs to go hand in hand with the fact that it can't be that overarching blanket solution where it's, we're going to do this one thing and it's going to work in every place, because that's been categorically proven to be not true. And so it's again that kind of push and pull of the need for that connection at the higher level and funding for those pieces, but to acknowledge that the needs and on the ground solutions in different areas are going to look different, and that gets into the essentially overcoming jurisdictional hurdles. I get into a lot of conversations where it's, it'd be great to do that, but that's so-and-so's jurisdiction. And the people don't care whose jurisdiction it is. They want us to work together so that they can go to school and go visit their grandmas and like all of those things. So that would be my answer to that.
Jumping off on that answer, when you talk about the people we're trying to serve with these kinds of systems, what are the sort of first principles when it comes to the needs of passengers accessing public transportation systems?
I would say safety is top of mind, and that's safety not just while they're waiting for and on said mode of transportation, but the first and last mile. So, you know, if I have to walk to a bus station, is it lit? Are there sidewalks? These are things that in rural places are hardly ever given consideration. There's a lot of getting on and off on highways with very high speeds, those types of things. So that safety piece is huge. And that turns a lot of people off public transit. I can quite literally run to our neighboring community faster than I could get there on a bus, and I would say it would actually be safer. So the safety piece, and then second to that is understanding who the audience is, and that who piece differs very according to community and region.
Both you and Ms. Perry have spoken about the impact that the lack of intercity bus service has on marginalized communities. Could you expand a little bit on what those impacts are? And I'm also curious whether these communities were being adequately served when Greyhound was at its peak, when we had full Greyhound service across Canada. Were the needs of those communities being adequately served? And how do we learn from that?
So, you know, in the interest of full disclosure, I don't typically study those longer distance trips as with Greyhound, but from what I do know, I don't think that they were being served because of that, not because of the long distance inadequacy, but because those shorter term regular trips weren't being met. We see that a lot, and a great example from the impact on local people is medical services. For example, you know, in the communities in my region, there's BC Transit, there's also specialized shuttles. They run intermittently, and if anyone has ever tried to get an appointment with a specialist, you know that they don't make it on your schedule. It's get here Tuesday, and it doesn't matter if the bus only runs every other Wednesday. And so in terms of the impact on people who don't have access or to a personal vehicle or who can't drive, those are the things that we're talking about. It's an inability to access medical and specialist appointments, other types of services, inability to hold a job. I work with a large number of international students.
Sorry, Dr. Breen, I'm going to have to cut you off there because we're over time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. We have online with us, joining us, Mr. Mackay. Thank you so much for figuring this out and being patient with our team until we had that done. I'm going to turn over to our clerk really quickly to ensure that we get a sound check done for the benefit of our interpreters. So I'll turn it over to you, clerk.
Good morning, Mr. Mackay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are just going to simply check about the sound and the headset just to make sure we properly hear you. So thank you for joining. So how's the weather? I need you to speak a little bit. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. I can't hear anything through my headphone. I can only hear through my laptop. So.
Is your mic selected?
Okay, can you hear me now?
We will need a little bit more talk just to make sure.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Would you mind to just speak a little bit about, I don't know, the committee, for instance?
What do you want me to say? It's been an absolute disaster getting connected to this morning, and it's far more difficult than it should be after 3 years of a pandemic. How does that work?
We still don't have the thumbs up from the interpretation, so I will ask you the regular question. How's the weather then?
It's fine.
We will need a little bit more talk just to make sure interpretation is hearing.
Well, I'm not sure what more you want me to do. I gave you a diatribe. If the committee would like me to hear what they like to hear what I really think about things, I mean, please continue asking questions. But I'd rather us focus our time on transportation than your tech, which doesn't seem to work.
Thank you very much. We're just going to check right now. Thanks. Interpretation is telling me that we are going to try, so we might also see how's it going. Thank you very much for attending, Mr. McKay.
So we'll turn it over. We'll continue with our line of questioning, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Strahl for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My questions will be for Dr. Breen. I just wanted to, we heard from previous testimony from witnesses who indicated that there was a need for sharing of data between modes of transport, but also between carriers, and suggested that this should be through a kind of a non-profit clearinghouse type of an entity. Have you done any work on that and have any comments? I think it is one of the recommendations that might come out of this report, and I'm just wondering if you have done any work to talk about. We talked about some of the bigger. If you're booking a holiday, you would use Expedia or Travelocity or something like that. But these are the fees for that are much too expensive for many of these smaller companies. So, have you done any work or have any thoughts on the need for that sort of a government supported, I guess, clearinghouse information sharing?
Thank you for the question. So one of the innovations one of the groupings of innovations we noticed when we were doing our work was the importance of software for everything that previous speakers have mentioned, tracking who's getting on, where they're getting off, all those types of things. And from I'm not a software expert, but from a technical perspective, the ability to set up a data sharing or links data sharing between different systems is not technically challenging. It's not that there's a specific software or that type of thing. It's technically possible. The challenge is in those data sharing agreements, particularly when it comes to for-profit companies not wanting to divulge things that they feel may interfere with their profits or that type of thing. But it is really important for multimodal transit and to link all those different systems that they are talking to each other. So it's not technically challenging. It is getting those data sharing agreements in place and making people play nice, for lack of a better way to say that.
Right, because as Mr. Bachrach said earlier, when you no longer have a single carrier that operates coast to coast, there might be a way to string together a few tickets to get from one destination to another. But if there's no coordination, and if someone doesn't have the technical expertise or the time or resources to develop that themselves, it would seem like this would be a good intervention for an entity to take on if they were empowered to do so. I wanted to talk, we've heard a bit about operating funding versus capital funding, and I think the challenge for government is that there is a certain amount of money available. Money is finite. I know in the last number of years there's been perhaps that belief has been suspended, but we hear about when I hear about the lack of resources for busing. And then I look at what is done for Via Rail, for instance, and we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar expansion that's been referenced for dedicated track, high-frequency rail, et cetera. The current subsidy for riders between Windsor to Quebec, it was $80 before per rider. Prior to the pandemic, it was $180 during the pandemic. From Jasper to Prince Rupert, $483 per passenger, up to almost $1,500 when ridership was down. So clearly the government of Canada is willing to subsidize certain travelers on certain routes using certain modes. And I guess my question is, how do you think the government of Canada should prioritize that? Because it seems to me that if we're talking about safety and helping giving people a hand up and perhaps giving them a service that they otherwise wouldn't have, that intercity busing or intercommunity busing would be maybe a fairer way, subsidy than subsidizing at what quite frankly are at least middle class people taking the train. So I guess I'd ask for your comments on that too. We're talking about fairness here. How is it fair that a rail passenger in a highly populated area from Windsor to Quebec City gets a huge subsidy, while people in often put in danger by traveling are getting nothing?
So I'll answer that the best I can, and perhaps one of my colleagues can jump in, because I don't have a great deal of knowledge on the rail system. I would say in terms of cost, we did a project recently called Building the Future in Ontario and other provinces. And a quote that stuck with me from one of the local government folks is that they would rather have no money predictably than the scattergun randomness that they're often, faced to deal with, responding to random calls for funding. And it becomes very difficult to work in a system of unpredictability. And so I would say there's this need for predictability and stability, particularly around transit. This is one of the reasons that we see the intercommunity regional transit in British Columbia being more successful, is because of the provincial entity that is BC Transit, that works with local governments and creates those local regional systems. Is it perfect? No. Does it handle those long distance things or cross province? Absolutely not. But it does provide, operational funding and predictability and stability for those communities.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You have about 30 seconds, Mr. Strahl.
I was going to ask Dr. Breen as well about the Highway 16 BC Transit improvements, whether that is an example, or how, obviously born out of tragedy, but has that, they've worked with communities, community groups, et cetera. Maybe just a brief comment on the work that's been done there, and whether that's a model that other communities can follow.
I'm afraid that while I know of the pilot and how it was structured, I haven't seen any information on its impact. I don't know if perhaps others have. I would be interested to know the answer, but I won't pretend that I know it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl, and thank you, Dr. Bean. We are going to turn it over to Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to concentrate my questions on Ms. Petronich. And I like the road, no pun intended, that Mr. Barceau-Duval and to some extent Mr. Bachrach were traveling down. And I'll preface my comments by saying this. It's 2023. And to some extent, our entire transportation system can be somewhat looked at as being a bit archaic. And I have to say this to the members of the committee, that this is not unlike what this committee is studying with respect to the integration of moving trade within our binational, our international supply chains. Yes, we've been talking about integrating distribution and logistics of trade, but now we're speaking about integrating distribution and logistics of people. And I'll say this to the witnesses, that it's not what we say or ask that makes it onto the record. It's your answers and your testimony that's put onto the record, and therefore very important to get what you're saying onto the record, therefore having the minister respond to that very testimony. So to Ms. Petronich, we know what the what is in terms of what the needs are. It's just a matter of getting to the how. So 2 questions, and I'm going to let you have the floor for the rest of my time. Do you think a multimodal people mover study would be more appropriate to pursue by this committee versus simply a bus study? And the second question to that, and I guess aligned with that, is data, digital, central booking, sustainable leverage funding to offset capital, upon which in turn offsets operational on the need to finance any capital debt. So I want to throw that on the floor, and Ms. Petronich, the floor is yours to answer that.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the question to the member, the dual questions. I'll answer the first one. Is a multimodal study more appropriate than a bus study? Yes. Absolutely. And the reason for that is this strategy has to emerge, or this study has to emerge with a strategy. And the strategy has to be very clear to the questions previously asked. Who do we want to move? How many Canadians do we want to move? Where do we want to move them? At what cost and how fast? That's it. We have to answer those questions, and we won't be able to answer them saying we want to move all Canadians everywhere all the time at any cost. The answer has to be we want to move some Canadians from some places at some times at a certain cost, at a certain speed, because it's finite resources out there. Layering on top of that, obviously, the issues that have been raised by my colleagues of who are the most vulnerable, who are the most at need, those should drive the answers to those questions. But those questions have to be answered. And if we leave it ambiguous and omnibus, we will continue to have a 19th century transportation system heading into the 22nd. So that's the first answer, should be multimodal. And the assumption underlying that is both public and private providers have a role to play in there, because there's money to be made on all sides of that equation with the clientele we have. And the clientele we have is 36 or 37 million Canadians at last head count, plus a few 100,000 immigrants every year. That's our clientele, and it's structured in about 5 large cities in this country with a smattering of smaller rural communities that are not connected today. That's the marketplace we're dealing with. So we need those answers. Who do we want to move? How many Canadians? Where? How, at what cost and how fast between those marketplaces? That is a logistics of passengers and clientele movement issue. It is no different than the freight matter that you referred to as a member. It is about moving people in the limited capacity of the system that we have today and incrementally growing it. And therefore, I would say, as a second component to the first question of a multimodal study, it is insufficient for the multimodal study to be a national strategy only. It does have to be a CUSMA study. For the same reason that when we talk about electrification and the use of hydrogen, it's not enough for CP and CN to find some hydrogen on either side of the country. They need a North American solution. So moving Canadians east to west and north to south does include integrating Canadians with the hubs and spots of Seattle, New York, across the North American barrier. So that does mean this study has to have some integration capacity, at least in the big centers of Vancouver and Toronto. That's the answer to the first question. Within that is, of course, those private providers, not only of coaching and shuttle services, but also the on-demand services. The answer to the second question, the data, twofold. One, identify the clientele. As a case study, it was only a couple years ago that Via Rea actually started identifying the profile of you. Air Canada has known all about you for years. Aeroplan has known all about you. Air Miles knows all about you. Via only just started to know about you. Anybody who's run a business knows you need to know your customer. We don't know anything about our customers. And that's not just Via. Public transit collects almost no data about its customer and clientele. How do we treat customers, therefore? Like a kick in the pants, because they're not treated as customers. They're treated as obligatory servants of a welfare system. That is no good and cannot proceed forward. So the first issue of data is identify the clientele so we know what the clientele wants. Where are they going? Who are they? What are their demographics? What's their profile from an income perspective? That data can be incorporated into this study because data can be collected at every point of contact. The app that I download, the ticket I buy, the ride I take, I can consent to handing over my data in exchange for a better service. That has to happen across those multi-modes. The second side of it is very business oriented, whether it's publicly subsidized or not. Those data allow for performance measures. They allow us to identify how many people are moving, how far, how fast, at what cost, and is the service we are subsidizing performing at the measures we expect.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petronich. I very much appreciate your responses, and thank you very much, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Doctor. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur.
Next, we have Mr. Barceau-Duval. You have the floor with 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm once again going to address my questions to Ms. Petronich, who's popular today. So I'll bring up a new subject that we haven't dealt with so far, which I think is quite interesting, and that's the issue of electrified bus transportation. I know this is something you've studied, and I'm wondering, it was difficult for me to get information about this. So what is the distance that you would be able to go in an electrified bus with the current technology? How far, what's the range? And in a sort of medium to long-term horizon, what can we expect on the market?
Thank you, sir, for the question. So there's the PhD answer, which we don't have time for, and then there's the Coles notes. The Coles notes is the range depends on the size of the battery and the platform. But in typical form, if you have a regular city bus that's 40 foot, like that's your normal city bus, and you have about a 400 kilowatt hour battery pack, you can get more, you can get less. But generally in the spring, summer, in good weather conditions, you're going to get about 300 kilometers out of that thing, 250 to 300 kilometers off a 400 kilowatt hour battery pack. In the winter, it's going to be under 200. So your range is cut in half. Put that battery pack on a coach bus and it's even less because you have to take a lot of space for luggage on a coach bus. And the dynamics of a coach bus are that you can't put all the battery at the top, it'll tip over. So unfortunately, it's not the same amount of range. And that is why the solution for electrified coaching and electrified transit does necessarily have to include high power charging systems at either location, right? On the route, in the middle of the city, if you're Metrolinx at GO stations. And this is going to require regional integration and planning across municipalities, regions, and provinces. That's what's coming up.
Merci pour votre réponse. Donc...
Thanks for the answer. So if I understand, I think it would be reasonable to expect that we could electrify our transit system. Let's say if it can do 150 to 200 kilometers, you could do that in between two stops, or you might be able to, stop somewhere for a few minutes and then continue on. And I do believe that charging technology is becoming more efficient. Is that true? Could you tell us a little bit about how that aspect of it is evolving?
Yes, thank you again for the question. The first component is correct. It is possible to increase the range of the electrified system overall, whether it's buses or coaches or rail for that matter, by adding more charging capacity. So you're pulling into a stop and you're topping up and then you're continuing your route along. It's not so much, however, to the second point of your question about chargers becoming more efficient. These are really high power charging systems at like 450 kilowatts, 600 kilowatts. They pump out a lot of electrons at a very high power level. They're pretty efficient. The problem is the absorption on the bus. It's the powertrain and the battery and the software being able to absorb the power at that level. You're basically blasting the powertrain with a ton of energy. You're going to blow the battery. You're going to degrade it. So the issue so far has been the absorption rate, and that slows it right down. We can put high power chargers
Thank you once
everywhere.
again, Dr. Petronich. I know you can go on, and we actually very much enjoy hearing you speak. Next, before I turn it over to Mr. Bachrach, I'd like to provide an opportunity, because I know Mr. Bachrach is going to have questions for Dr. Mackay, for Mr. Mackay, to provide an opening remarks or an opening presentation for 5 minutes. Mr. Mackay, it's totally up to you. No pressure. I know we're kind of putting you on the spot here, but if you're willing to do it, we'd very much like to hear it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Can you hear me okay?
I believe we can. I'm going to look around the room. I think we should be good.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry for my tardiness. I had informed the staff ahead of time I have drop-off duty for my daughters this morning, so that is why I was delayed. So my name is Joel Mackay. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Northern Development Trust. We're a regional economic development organization that serves Northern British Columbia, about an area the size of France. To give you a sense of our magnitude, we have about $500 million in assets. And a year and a half ago, we took on responsibility in partnership with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure here in British Columbia, as well as with BC Transit for BC Bus North, as well as intercity transportation for the area of British Columbia that is described as Northern BC, which is the Fraser Canyon north to the Yukon border. In that time, we have taken $7.5 million, so not much money. And with that, we have been able to create an integrated transportation network in 18 months that includes 18 intercity transportation services, both long haul and intercity short haul, so between 100 and 200 kilometer distances, serving both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. We've been able to add routes throughout that entire service area, reduce the cost and keep the fare cost in line with inflation. And this year, we are launching a new project that will be a first in Canada called the Connected Network. The Connected Network is a project that will create, for the first time, tech that allows the traveler to transfer between all of these services using their mobile device or a phone-in service without any issue. Right now in northern British Columbia, frankly, anywhere in Canada, you have to act as your own travel agent. That is difficult when there are a number of different transportation services that are run by different nonprofits or for-profits. We see this as a key barrier. We've adopted a tech that has already been deployed in Western Europe in a far more complex transportation environment than in Canada, and we are going to pilot it and integrate these services here beginning this summer. So in short, our focus and why we're involved in this is because we see ground transportation as critical in northern British Columbia to serve the economy, which is our mandate. We take a community economic development approach to that. And in 18 months, we've been able to significantly expand ground transportation services in northern BC, integrate them, add new routes, and actually reduce the cost. And we will very shortly be launching a new technology. So I hope that provides an overview of what our involvement is here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mackay. I actually have a request from some members here to pass that information along to us if you could. It would be great to have that on hand. Mr. Bachrach, I'll turn it over to you to have your line of questionings. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mackay. I really wanted the committee to hear your testimony, especially because I think British Columbia, Northern British Columbia, is unique in all of Canada in terms of the evolution of intercommunity transportation. And I really appreciate the role that the Trust has played and you've played as CEO in trying to integrate what has become a bit of a patchwork of services that have evolved over time. Obviously, this goes back well over a decade, and a lot of it was driven by the concerns about the tragic history of our highway through the region. You spoke a little bit about where we're at now with 18 different services, many of them publicly funded, and the need for integration and the role of technology in that. You also mentioned the $7.5 million you've been provided to achieve this monumental task. Perhaps you could speak broadly about federal leadership. If the federal government was serious about public ground transportation and wanted to play a substantive role in enhancing the work that you're doing, what would that role look like? How could the federal government play a meaningful role in ensuring that Northern British Columbia residents have access to affordable, safe, convenient bus transportation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, from my perspective, as somebody who's spent their career in rural development and previous to that in the media, it would be nice if the federal government got serious about rural development, full stop. We have not had leadership on that file, regardless of whether or not it is economic development, transportation, trade, defense for half a century. So that's the first thing. The second thing is where I see a federal role is really in the interprovincial piece. Transportation jurisdictionally, in my view, is primarily the responsibility of the provincial governments. That's where the leadership should be coming. However, the federal government can lead by helping to get the provinces, incentivizing the provinces and the territories to work together to have that integrated system that is going to travel across province. Look, from a British Columbia perspective, we're already doing this in Northern BC. Our intent is within 2 to 3 years that what we built will have expanded across the entire province. But our influence and our ability ends at our borders. It would be really nice to have that integrated with other provinces, and as one of the earlier speakers said, integrated with the US system as well. It's critically important for the movement of people in North America. That is where the federal leadership should come in. It does take leadership, it takes direction, but I don't think it takes a ton of money. I think you can actually do these things very effective by building on solutions that are already operating in jurisdictions throughout Canada, linking them together, and enforcing that collaboration in the way in which that we have been able to achieve that here in Northern BC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mackay. Picking up on that leadership question and the need for interprovincial coordination, we've had the minister at committee. We've asked him those questions. He feels very strongly that this lies within the province's wheelhouse. And yet, I imagine you talk to passengers in Northern BC that need to get to Calgary, that need to get to Winnipeg or Toronto. do we need to see more from the federal government when it comes to pushing those solutions forward, even in the context of provinces that aren't prioritizing it as highly as perhaps they should?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a jurisdictional perspective, every province is going to tell you that it's not going to work beyond its borders. Like it can't with its tax dollars, right? So that is where a federal government needs to come in and actually provide some direct leadership, if not an incentive or both, to make sure that that network is integrated. I would add that in our service area, you know, we've got a gap right now with services that go up to Fort Nelson, but we don't have services that extend from Fort Nelson to Watson Lake or up to the Yukon. The federal government assumes a different level of responsibility for the territorial government. So when it comes to Northern Canada, it should actually have more of a leadership role than it would with the provinces. And that's critically important for getting people around, be it in Yukon, Nunavut, or Northwest Territories, and integrating with their provincial counterparts.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. My last question is around multimodal, and we've heard from Dr. Petronich and others about this vision of integrating rail and bus transportation. Now, you and I both live in northern BC. We know how challenging it is to use passenger rail for anything other than tourism purposes. Is integrating with passenger rail something that is within the scope of the technology you're trying to implement? And is the potential for multimodal integration in northern BC a reality at this point, given the inherent challenges that Via Rail faces?
It is. We expect that multimodal integration through the connected network will be live within 12 to 24 months. So we're going to start with the 18 transportation services that we already have. We're going to expand those to Northern Health Connections, which is our provincial northern bus ground service. Then we're going to add in Via Rail, BC Ferries, and then we're going to look to integrate ride sharing and taxis as well. The technology exists. It's well established. It's been operating in Europe, and again, in the Canadian context, our transportation environment is far less complex from the sense of how many transportation services are operating in a concentrated area. Our complexity is distance, climate, those types of things, and then of course the business case around it. So yeah, I absolutely think that is achievable from a technology perspective. The problem with passenger rail is that right now in northern British Columbia, the primary focus for rail is on freight movement. That's great for the economy, but it creates delays, as you know, and I've experienced in northern BC if you're a rail passenger. So I do not see a future under the existing structure where rail transportation in Western Canada is an affordable, reliable solution for the average citizen with the average household income. It's too expensive. It takes too long.
Thank you.
The infrastructure's not there.
Thank you, Mr. McKay.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Bachrach.
Je voudrais juste comprendre.
I'm just trying to understand, today we have some witnesses who are not able to actually testify, and we weren't able to ask them questions. So I'm wondering if sound tests were done in advance with those witnesses, and if, it had worked at the time with the interpreters. Were the results adequate at the time? Yes, so it was just Miss Perry. Unfortunately, we couldn't actually get Mr. McKay online in order to do the tests earlier, so they did offline tests. And when Mr. McKay was able to join us, that was when I gave the floor to the clerk to do those sound tests. So unfortunately, there are a lot of things have been going wrong in this room today. I've heard from the clerk that this room has a reputation for having technical problems. So we'll try to never use this room again. But it is a good question. And I also wanted to say,
Harry, we very much wanted to hear you speak and provide your testimony, and I actually spoke to the clerk. We have one more meeting scheduled for this study. We already have 4 witnesses lined up for that. We always have room for 6 in a 2-hour meeting, so we'd very much like to invite you back if you are willing to join us once again and give us 2 hours of your time, which is very valuable. We will be sending out an invite to you to join us for that meeting. So with that, I want to thank all of actually, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lewis, if it's okay with you. I'll turn it over to Mr. Lewis to have the final line of questioning before I thank our witnesses for their time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses, of course, for your testimony. I'm going to, there's a couple of things, Dr. Breen, that you had mentioned that really caught my attention. You talked about urban adjacent. Can you tell me the difference between urban adjacent and what I'm thinking now, rural adjacent? And to set that question up, in fairness to yourself, my riding of Essex is next to Windsor, which is obviously next to the busiest international bridge in North America. And so the majority of, a lot of my riding would be incredibly rural. We have about 5 municipalities with around 25,000 folks each in them. And there's only one bus, to my understanding, the best of my understanding, between the Leamington-Kingsville area that goes up to the city. And so I'd just be curious, can you explain the difference between urban and adjacent, rural and adjacent, and then I'm going to jump into the cross-border side of things.
Certainly, it's a fuzzy definition, as most things in academia are, but an urban adjacent community would be a rural location where you would be able to commute to work every day. So for example, my brother lives in an urban adjacent rural community and commutes to Mississauga every day. That's possible for him. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's not possible for me. That would be typical, distance-wise, could be, anywhere up to 100 plus kilometers. Obviously, that being fuzzy, we know that there are areas in Southern Ontario that aren't strictly urban adjacent, even though their proximity might indicate otherwise. So it's a combination of distance from urban with the travel patterns of the people who live there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Breen. And it is a little bit fuzzy, but I do appreciate the answer for sure. So, as I mentioned, a very unique riding. So I can literally go from from rural to urban to large city to now what I would like to jump into is the challenges of cross-border. So not only inner-city, I suppose inner-city, but inter-country inner-city. And so there's a lot of folks that commute from Windsor over to Detroit and vice versa, and using our bus lines. Can you expand a bit on what would make life simpler for these folks with regard to how our countries work together? And I'm not just talking about nexus, so to speak, or passports. I'm trying to look at it at a larger scale with regard to the bus lines. Is there something specific there that we should be looking at / working on?
I would defer the opportunity to answer to one of my colleagues. I strictly focus on rural Canada and don't do cross-border, so I don't think I'm the best person to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Petronik. Would you be able to answer that question?
Yes, thank you. It's an excellent question. And Windsor is really at the nexus in the forefront of what international public mobility and public transit should look like. There's a great case study in Windsor Transit. If you get on the Windsor Transit bus, you can hop over the border in a matter of minutes. They have got such a good system set up with Detroit on the other side in terms of public transit. Clearly, there were municipal and federal dialogues that allowed for that. It's clean, it's safe, it's efficient. Get on the previous Greyhound bus, as I used to get into Detroit for auto conferences, and you get stuck for 5 hours on the border. There is not the same kind of interconnectivity, same border, same crossing point, nearly a few meters apart effectively, and one gets stuck for hours and the other has an integrated service. And it is very clear in Canada that the place to start building the best practices is the Windsor Transit pattern of behavior. It is extremely efficient. I have not seen anywhere else in Canada that mobility across the border is that cheap, that fast, and that seamless for anybody on a bus. So that's a case study to build from. As I said, to repeat, it did take federal intervention to make that happen and went well beyond the capacity and jurisdiction of the city and the province to enable that.
Thank you. I'm sure that I passed that message on to the mayor of Windsor as well. So kudos to him and his council and all levels of government. And so, and I know what you're talking about with regard to that bus. But usually once a year I get to go over and watch my beloved Detroit Lions play, and I usually take the bus. And I always go over with a big smile, but I don't usually have a big smile when I come back. So thank you very much for that, and I appreciate answering those questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. And I do still respect you, even though you're a Lions fan. Go Packers. I want to conclude by thanking sincerely all of our witnesses for joining us today and for apologizing for some of the technical issues that we've had, specifically to Mr. Mackay and also Ms. Perry. We look forward to having you back, Ms. Perry. We'll send that invitation out shortly. And with that, I will suspend the meeting for 5 minutes as we move in camera. Thank you, everyone.